the importance of keeping kids in the faith, of raising kids to love the Catholic faith, love the Christian faith, and stay in that faith is underscored in two ways this week by my guest. First of all, she strayed from the faith of her childhood into New Ageism, into atheism, and was brought back rip-roaring through experiences of truth, of beauty, and goodness, of the beauty of nature, of creation, of the truth of stories that resonate, of the goodness of things she was experiencing and understanding in the Catholic Christian faith. And on the other hand, she is now a children's author writing books that she hopes will fill in those gaps that she experienced in her own life, in her own childhood, that was missing, that would really instruct and teach those beautiful, deep truths of the Catholic faith. This week on the show, it's an amazing journey into how someone goes from, well, the Christian faith into atheism, the New Age movement, exposed to truth and beauty through all kinds of different avenues, and still struggles with things like ego and thinking about self and the prosperity gospel at one point, which is an amazing kind of side venture in this journey, but ends up ultimately as a Catholic, as a Catholic children's author, in love with the faith that she wants to spread to others, to share those stories that she wishes she heard in her childhood, and now wants everyone to hear and to grow in as they grow up. This is a story about an awesome journey, an awesome author, illustrator. It's a great story. Please watch and enjoy. Hey friends, welcome to the show. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. If you are listening on podcasts, on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify, please leave a rating and a review on those platforms. And thanks for listening there. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe to this channel, hit the bell notification for new videos each and every week, and please give us a thumbs up on this video. And thank you for watching. My guest this week is Izabela Ciesinska. I am sure I butchered her name, Izabela, and I'm sorry my Polish relatives are rolling in their graves right now as we speak, but she is in fact a fantastic author and illustrator. A brand new book out from Ascension, The Little Donkey and God's Big Plan. It's wonderful, Ascension Kids, and she has a fantastic story to tell us today. Her amazing conversion from atheism into the Catholic faith, and that's Catherine's children's author. It's amazing. Thank you, Izabela, thank you for suffering our tech problems, my horrible introduction skills, but thank you nonetheless for being here today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Keith.
I don't know that I ever butchered introductions so poorly as I have this time. So thank you. I'm glad that you're a part of that with me this week. Listen, this book, The Little Donkey and God's Big Plan, it's fantastic. I want to say more about it in a little bit, because I want to hear your story and get that underway, because it's sounds like a fantastic kind of story. But what I love about this story, and I'll just say this first of all, and then we can get into that, is, like, you know, there's an ancient tradition of reading the Bible and putting yourself in those places, in those stories, and, you know, looking around, you know, asking questions of the scene, excuse me, taking it all in, these kinds of things. I never would have imagined taking the place of the donkey in the story, and what, you know, and living out that the donkey's point of view from a beautiful, you know, biblical narrative. So kudos on bringing the donkey to life. Like, that's wonderful. It's a wonderful book, wonderful message, great story. So thank you for bringing that to us. Thank you for creating that and putting it out there. It's wonderful.
Thank you so much, Keith. There's been a few stories, children's stories done about the little donkey, so I don't want to take credit for, you know, for thinking that I'm original. But where my story differs a little bit is that as I was reading the Bible, these two little lines, or even one line, depending on which gospel you're reading, that mentions a little donkey. And I was just so taken that this little donkey, doing what he was created to do, ended up in an immortalized, basically. Yes. And that just touched me.
Yeah, yeah. Isn't that amazing? Because of course, it is that donkey forever. That's amazing. I love that. That's wonderful. Okay, we'll get back to that in a bit, I think. But I want to first of all kind of get out of the way and give you a chance to talk about how you got there, because it's a pretty remarkable story, I think, from as you said, atheism to being a Catholic children's author with these awesome messages to share with Catholic kids and families. So I don't know where you want to begin. You can go back as far as you want to go back. We'll unwind your story. I'm excited to hear it. I'll jump in along the way when it makes sense, ask some questions, but I'll get out of the way to start with and let you kind of unpack, where you want to begin your journey for us.
Sure. It's going to be a long one. I'll do my best to condense it into something enjoyable for people. But I was born Catholic. I'm Polish. So I was born into the faith. My grandmother and my grandparents were very faithful. But my parents, they didn't practice. My father was an atheist, but he was a cultural Catholic. So he loved the culture, but he wasn't able to practice maybe as he wanted to. It just didn't click for him. My mother is very faithful, a very faithful Christian, but she also wasn't able to comprehend everything in the Catholic faith. So I and my brother were raised not understanding the faith very well, even though we went to a Catholic church. And only years, like decades later, did I understand why I didn't appreciate the faith. And so, when you don't appreciate something, you don't value it. When you don't understand it, you don't value it. And so I strayed a little bit, and I ended up I discovered the new atheist movement in my late 20s. And it was, I just felt like I discovered, I hate to put it this way, but like a holy grail of knowledge. It just hit me. It felt like I all of a sudden was getting answers that I didn't get anywhere else. And all it was, in looking in retrospect, it just stimulated a different part of my brain. That's all it did. And as young people, you want to be fed. You're hungry. And I felt like I was being fed. And for 5 years, I walked down that path. And it brought me to what I can only describe as a black hole. There was just nothing there. And the determining, or the point that really affected me was coming across hard determinism, where atheists started talking about there's no free will. And that just sat so wrong with me. I couldn't digest it. And so slowly I started kind of asking questions. And in the meantime, I had a lot of conversations with my mom, because my mom, even though she wasn't a devout Catholic, she was still very faithful, and she prayed a lot for me. We had a lot of discussions, but maybe her conversations primed me for what happened next. In 2014, I went to California. I drove from Toronto with a team to California. And if anyone's taken that drive, they know that it starts very boring and it ends spectacular. And the moment that atheist me drove into Arizona, 5 minutes later, I was a full-blown believer. I believed in God, basically. Maybe I wasn't Catholic. I was barely Christian, but an overwhelming conviction that there's just no way this happened on its own. The power in the rocks, how they must have ripped through the earth, and it just looked like a landscape painting, stunning landscape. And the whole 5 hours through Arizona, I kept saying, there must be a God. There's a God. There's definitely a God. And I think that's when I started searching. But unfortunately, because I didn't have the foundation, I searched in a lot of wrong places. I went through New Ageism, unfortunately, occult, a lot of occult things, and all the teachings about star seeds and all these things where I believe those people are genuinely seeking. But the mistake that we make when we walk through that path is those other philosophies tell us that we are the God. That if you meditate enough, if you understand the law of attraction enough, if you do certain things, certain rituals or whatever, you'll be able to bring into existence what you think you should happen. And eventually that also sat very wrong with me because it felt very selfish. It felt like I'm the center of the universe, everything's revolving around me. And that's when I started entering Christianity more. Like I started leaving the New Age more for Christianity, but of course, you can't just go from New Age to Catholicism. Yeah. So I went through the prosperity gospel, right? Still trying to create things. And even though eventually I realized that's also not where the answers are, that, that it's not about me. What that prosperity gospel did for me was that it got me really fascinated in Christian theology. And that fascination made me realize, like, the more I dug, the more I learned, I realized, no, the only way to do this is to go orthodox. Like, you have to have a conservative approach to this. And I was ready. I was ready because at that time, of all the publishers that I submitted the little donkey to, the Catholic publisher Ascension Press responded to me. And they had questions for me. My first interview with them did not go very well. They asked me about the Pope. They asked me about, all these Catholic things. And I was like, I don't practice any of it. And yet they gave me a contract anyway. And I was just so taken by these ladies. Somehow, I don't know what they saw in me at that time, but they gave me a contract. And I was compelled to, I felt like I owed it to them to look into the faith more. And fortunately, there's a gorgeous Catholic church 10 minutes from my house. It looks like it was built in the medieval times. I stepped in and that's it. It was over for me. It was 1 year ago and I've been attending every Sunday. And I just love it. The more I learn, the more I love the faith.
Yeah. Yeah. I love how beauty is that thing that first kind of drew you deeper and then draws you deeper still. You see, and I think that's one of those things that really, Christian Catholic apologists, philosophers will talk about in opposition to atheism, right? Well, look at this, beauty. That's one of those things that, Bishop Barron talks about. Lots of these apologists, this is one of those kind of, not a new area, but of all the areas and avenues to kind of share and spread Christianity, look, there must be something out there because look at this beauty. I think these days, that's just more and more kind of, a live option for people. Like, it's the beauty. There's videos out just recently on YouTube with all kinds of, new, people exploring ideas of beauty. And where does this come from? Well, hey, maybe this points toward God, right? And then here's you taking that kind of apologetic and witnessing that. Here's you as an atheist driving down to California, right? And seeing this beauty and really being forced to go, well, my framework doesn't explain this. If nothing created this, what's it doing here, right? I think that's amazing that's really like this is an idea that's out there, but here's an actual person who's seen something beautiful and gone, yeah, there's something here, right? That's really fascinating.
Oh, it's very fascinating because truth, beauty, and goodness, they are very connected. And I believe that they are definitely languages of God because beauty alone, what makes something beautiful? There's a whole bunch of laws that make a composition beautiful. It's got to be balanced. There's got to be proper juxtaposition, and it also has to be functional. If it's dysfunctional, we innately know that there's something off about it. And not only that, true beauty is very subtle. Believe it or not. It doesn't use gimmick. It doesn't try to impress you, yet it does because of its just perfection, right? And that's what I'm noticing. A lot of modern artists, they completely don't get it. That's why they need so much gimmick to entertain us. Whereas you compare that to the Renaissance, to just, a cathedral, beautifully made cathedral, and that's it. You just you're taken to another dimension, because in a way it does have that ability to do. It's I don't know what it is, a collision of laws that just communicates something much deeper to us that I don't think we can fully define even.
Yeah, yeah, and you and your framework, right? You said you were a Christian as soon as you got to Arizona, right? Because it was just, excuse me. You said you're a Christian as soon as you got to Arizona because it was just unbelievable. Here's these, you said, rocks just breaking into the earth, and how amazing that is, and how that design, that beautiful composition, how could that just be kind of random chance, right? It speaks to a creator. Right? It speaks to an intelligence behind that beautiful composition, right?
Oh, yeah. Especially in Arizona, you really see it, because one would expect that if something randomly rips out of the earth, that it would look... the word is failing me now. It would look more disorderly. Yet in Arizona, it's not that it's very orderly, but in Arizona, there's this strange thing where there's peace and raw power, like the kind of power. It was a form of violence almost that just threw these rocks out of the ground. But the way that they were placed, it was the most peaceful setting. And so it just hit me like it would have to be a lot more messy if it was just by nature, throw anything on the ground, try to throw anything up and see what happens. It doesn't come down as beautiful. And yet in Arizona, it was just breathtaking. It was better than anything you've seen on a movie screen.
Yeah, that's remarkable. And I love that, that kind of a journey. So, your default wasn't to just become Christian, right? After that, you're open up to this beautiful thing you can't quite understand. And like you said, kind of your first instinct was to head back to that kind of new age-ish stuff, right? I have a similar trajectory in my own journey. I kind of became nominally Christian. I was raised nominally Christian, kind of, Jesus on Christmas and Easter kind of thing, and had kind of an awakening experience at like a band backyard summer barbecue campfire when I was in 10th grade or something. And it was this new age guy around the fire who was talking to us about his kind of philosophy. And he was a couple of grades older, had long hair, a leather jacket, kind of cool looking guy. And it was the first time that I was exposed to kind of the ideas of, well, there's something bigger out there. Like, look at this world. We're all connected. And so my first instinct was, well, this guy is saying things that I hadn't thought about. And I then wanted to know, how do I be like him? Well, it turns out he was this new age kind of practitioner guy, right? I think he called himself Wiccan or something at the time. And this was, thanks be to God, the early age of the internet. So when I tried to Google, what do Wiccans believe, how to be a Wiccan, I couldn't find anything because there wasn't very good search engines back then. And I kind of searched for a bit and kind of gave up, and then asked my best friend who was a Christian, hey, what do you believe? Is it kind of like this? And he was kind of like, no, not like that, but here's what I believe. Let's talk about this, right? So I love that, for you, that's a similar kind of experience that, your first instinct in seeing this beautiful stuff isn't to, oh, I'm going to go back and be Catholic, like the faith I was raised in, as a kid. It's kind of back to this, or, into this thing that you were kind of wrapped up in before, but then that leads to, the back into the church, right? It's a gateway. Like, if you're seeking the truth, you're going to find it, even if the path is meandering, right?
Oh, that's very true. That's going to be one of my future stories, because if we can get children to simply pursue God, to cultivate a love. I don't want to say curiosity, because curiosity kills the cat. So I'm not saying don't be curious about certain things, but it needs to be balanced. Curiosity, I think, needs to be balanced with a genuine pursuit of truth. You need to love truth enough to know when your curiosity is derailing you. because that's what happens to a lot of, I think, people who seek, they're more fascinated, or maybe they're more taken by that dopamine rush of having discovered something new, which is what the pursuit of knowledge can do to us. And then when you compound that with ego, like, I just discovered a new philosophy that's going to give me powers. I'm going to be able to build the life I want. It's a recipe for, I don't want to say disaster, but a long detour. And a lot of people in the world, they do that because also, in a way, our culture glorifies vice. So a lot of our spirituality, unfortunately, has been infiltrated by vice instead of virtue. And in Christianity, we are taught the pursuit and cultivation of virtue, that, contribution is far more important than fame. Even if it makes you poor, you have to follow the path of Jesus Christ and do your best to contribute to his kingdom. So it's I think a combination of that hunger. We all have that, what is it, C.S. Lewis said, that we all have a God-shaped hole in our heart. But when we try to fill that hole in a culture that kind of pulls us in all these different directions, it might take us a long time before we find the things that are going to, the thing that is going to put us on the right path. So that's why I derailed.
Yeah, yeah. And I like this, not necessarily curiosity, is that pursuit, right? Because, it is that we don't necessarily want to be kind of wandering everywhere and trying every new thing, but you want kids, you want Catholics, you want Christians who are spiritually hungry. And I guess for me, it's the idea of being docile, like being willing to pursue kind of God where he takes you, but treading in that direction. I love that idea, and I love that you mentioned too that before that the new age practices that kind of drew you in were so egocentric. We're very much about improving you and giving you these abilities, to control your life and shape your destiny and stuff. Let's talk about that for a minute, because I think, like you're saying here, this is really in sharp contrast to not what the world's telling us, right? Because the world's saying, it's about you. You do those things, right? But the Catholic Church stands in pretty stark contrast to that, right? The idea of it's all about you. You improve yourself. You shape your own destiny. We're kind of on the opposite end of that spectrum when we're saying, no, you rely on Jesus. Like, you'd abandon those things for Christ and pursue him and love your neighbor and give to your neighbor. Can we talk about that ego kind of centrism of some of those things that you experienced in your journey?
Sure. Yeah, I worked in film for 10 years. So, the entertainment industry, it attracts people maybe that are trying to prove their worth, prove their value, as opposed to perhaps discover their God-given talent and to use it for the betterment of society. And I was guilty of that too. Because, as artists, we also have insecurities. We're like kids that need to be validated all the time. And that can, if an artist doesn't grow out of that, they create a hell for themselves, because they're essentially going to be giving the world what it wants, not what it needs. If the world wants more sex, more violence, then the artist is going to give them more sex and more violence. And over time, what is that going to do to the human soul, to the artist and to the world, right? Well, we see it very clearly in entertainment and in our culture. So I was a little bit guilty of that as well, wanting to maybe prove myself as an artist and thinking that first of all, not knowing myself, I thought I wanted to be a filmmaker, a director, not really fully realizing that I can be a world builder while being a writer and an illustrator, right? So maybe I didn't understand myself well enough, or maybe it was also at the time, it was before the age of the internet. The filmmaker had some sort of big prestige to be a director or something. So that probably influenced me to walk down that path as well. And I still love film. I still want to return to film, but more now on my terms. With my IP now, with the little donkey and other stories that I want to create for children, whether that's going to happen or not, it almost doesn't matter to me, because now I've gotten to a point where I'm not creating things to please people or to perhaps prove that I'm good at something. I no longer feel that need, although in many ways I feel like I'm an even better creator now, because there's someone else I want to please. Yeah. He lives upstairs, up in the heavens. So that's what I'm motivated now, to create something that is going to be guided by and pleasing to our Heavenly Father. I don't know if it will please him, but I feel like creating for him and for a better kingdom, that's the most we can do. That's the best we can do. Yeah, and when we create for the world, that's when we fall into a trap, because then the world inspires us instead of the Holy Spirit inspiring us. So yeah, I think for me it was mainly artistic, wanting to prove myself as an artist, and I would say it was predominantly that. Yeah, it was probably insecurities manifesting themselves as that, wanting to accomplish big things in an area that I wasn't supposed to work in.
Yeah. Now, that makes sense. And I wonder too about the idea, of the kind of the occult nature of some new age stuff. I don't know if you have a particular insight. Maybe you'll say, I don't know, this is out of my realm of expertise. I wouldn't think that many are experts on this, that it would come on this show. Maybe you're the best one we'll get. But I'm wondering about the idea of the place of that, right? Because there is a sense, and I read this more and more in the places that I occupy on the internet, that not necessarily the demonic, like the actual demons, right? But one of these things that the enemy is using to draw us away from God are these things. Are things as mundane as getting into comment wars on YouTube, right? Or things that draw us out of our practice of the Christian faith into these kind of new age elements. Do you have a sense, did it feel looking back at some of those things that you were learning or thinking about in the kind of the new age movement, in that part of your journey, was nefarious, was kind of more than just like mundane or not a great thing, but really kind of out to get you? Does that make sense? I mean, that sounds too scary and like woo-woo. I don't know, but
no, it's you're onto something, because I didn't realize it until after. I think the biggest lesson I learned from this journey is that the devil comes to you as everything you ever wanted. He doesn't come to you in a repulsive way. You don't know you're being sucked into something. You're being rewarded for certain behaviors, for certain contributions. And it does take a very aware person, aware in who they really serve. Because if you serve God, there are certain things you should not create. There are certain things you should not speak, you should not watch, you should not consume. So having that awareness allows you to notice those sneaky ways, those sneaky little rewards or sneaky little temptations that don't even look like temptations. They might appear as opportunities. And all of a sudden you think you've hit the jackpot. You really people need to learn how to say no. Do not compromise your morals, your values. There's not only a personal price, there's a cultural, social, civilizational price. We compare today's culture to 100 years ago. Yeah. The way the buildings work, the architecture, the way people dressed. A lot of people might disagree, but it's very clear that there's a cultural decline. It's clear to me. You don't go from the Renaissance and Beethoven to today, without there being some sort of decline. So I definitely think there are nefarious forces at play, but people don't recognize them as nefarious.
Yeah.
But I can tell you, they became very clear to me when I made the commitment to work for our Heavenly Father, and when I started working on this book, The Little Donkey. Even though it's just a little children's book, you would think, you know, I would have peace creating it. Yeah. Not so. My kitchen flooded. Just my neighbor's pipe just fell off. Her kitchen pipe fell off, just like that, and flooded my kitchen for close to probably 13 hours.
Oh my God.
And, you know, I made like a little, like I took 2 dishwashing racks and I put one up on the cupboard, one underneath. I created like a waterfall. I'm like, not today, Satan. And I kept working on my, on my book, and my neighbor, my landlord came and fixed it like the next day. But also my water, like not my water, my toilet seal broke, and it smelled like sewage in my bathroom, and I got sick, just terribly, terribly sick, about 3 or 4 times while working on this book, to the point where I couldn't get out of bed. Yeah. And it was a problem because I have a deadline, you know, and so while this was happening, I was like, oh wow, this has never happened before. Like how in a span of, you know, one little book, so many things, unpleasant things, like it felt like something was trying to stumble me. So that was my first time experiencing something like that. But I got to tell you, even though it was happening, like I didn't feel any fear, because I fortunately came to understand what was happening and immediately turned to prayer and endured. And here we are.
That's amazing. Yeah, I don't remember where this idea came from, some kind of misquoted quote that I heard along the way somewhere. But the idea that, if you're experiencing those kind of trials, it's a good indication you're on the right pathway, right? That Satan's trying to hold you back. All these things are happening. It's a good indication that you're going in the right direction, because what you're creating there is something that that's going to benefit the world, right? It's going to draw people closer to God, and the enemy doesn't really, want that. So I think that's brilliant, and really interesting that those are the kind of trials that you began to experience, even as you say, writing this children's book. That's really fascinating. I'm curious, take a bit of a detour to ask you how one gets into the prosperity gospel Christianity, because this is a pretty interesting area of Christianity. Looking from the outside in, I think many of us would go, okay, that's clearly not, it's fancy cars and piles of money. I'm curious to know how you got into that and what, and I guess got out of that, and what that kind of experience is like, because it seems like, again, more of that kind of ego-centered kind of way of presenting the faith, right? Where here you do this and you'll get this. You'll do this, you'll get kind of this. God wants to bless you with all these different things, right? I think of that in contrast to you writing this book and sick in bed and the pipes bursting. I can kind of see a clear path. Which one I think is seems more like, you're on the right path. So I'll encourage you in that for sure. But how do you get in and get out of that kind of a version of Christianity?
That's a really good question, because I didn't think of it until you asked that question. There seems to be a very subtle bridge between the New Age manifestation movement and Christianity, or prosperity gospel. Sure, and that's this niche on YouTube. It's a very big niche, and it's kind of these motivational videos, and you can do it when you're depressed. Keep going. You can win. Things like that. And I guess I needed it, but these videos end up using quotes by preachers, pastors, and priests that are very inspirational. But those quotes or those sermons are taken out of context, and they're put in these motivational videos quite often, not for the purpose that the pastor intended. And so when it's edited with powerful music, you feel like you're on fire, you're ready to go. They're very well done. And in a way, maybe they're necessary. Maybe they're exactly what people need to segue out of one thing and into another.
Sure, yeah.
But for me, and I can see how people get trapped in the prosperity gospel, and they kind of treat God like a Santa Claus.
Yeah.
For me, it really was. I was more taken by the knowledge. I've always been a pursuer of knowledge. That had more value to me than wealth, than all these other things. So learning about Christianity, discovering people like C.S. Lewis, discovering was it Bishop Fulton? He's no longer alive. Yeah. I mean, he was just, some of his sermons were wonderful. And that, I think that fed me so much more than anything else. And wanting to learn more, and eventually coming to understand what Jesus meant when he said, love God with all your heart, with all your strength, with all your mind. And I found myself there. Slowly that love and pursuit of God started to take over everything, where, you know, Santa Claus was I didn't want him. I wanted our Father. I wanted Father. When Jesus referred to God as his Father, that's what I wanted to understand.
Yeah. And I love that. I mean, there's something to be said for somebody who is, you know, who's baptized and raised as a Catholic. There are graces, you know, at that baptism that no matter how far you go from the root of the church, those graces are still going to follow you and keep drawing you back in, right? Lots of listeners and viewers on this show are people who have, you know, loved ones, whether it be, you know, children or relatives or friends who have strayed from the faith. And the question that I get lots of times, and I've had guests on the show talking to this exact topic before too, is, well, how do I bring them back? How do I bring them back to the practice of the faith, right? And the answer really is, well, that baptized person's carrying that grace with them, right? And you got to pray for them, but, you know, God is drawing them back because they have that seal as a Catholic, somebody who's raised Catholic, whether it was, you know, really intentionally practiced or not. They had that sacrament, and that did something to them. Do you feel like, I know you mentioned that, you know, your parents tried. You said, I think you said your dad was kind of a functional atheist almost, but your mom tried, and they took you and they tried, you know, and you're Polish, so I think by default, right? Like that puts you somewhere on the spectrum, right? Do you feel like there was that thing that, like, now you're looking back, you go, yeah, you know what? There was that thing that no matter how far I strayed, kind of was pulling me back in. No matter what I did, it was going to keep on tugging. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yes. I think baptism was one. You mentioned it, and now that I've witnessed, I think, 3 baptisms in my church now, and there is such a power and joy in the congregation when a little baby gets baptized. So I think that has a power that stays with the child. But also I have to say, I think it was my mother's prayers, and not just my mother's prayers. A lot of people prayed for me that I didn't know until I started being overtly Christian. I started posting Christian content. And one of my, she's not even she lives in Australia. We're more like acquaintances. When she saw me post like a Christian post a month ago, she's like, "Are you Christian now? We haven't spoken like a decade." I'm like, "Yes, I so am. I have a book coming out, right?" And she's like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe I've been praying for you." Wow. So this lady's been praying for me. We've never spoken on the phone. We've only spoken over email. She was going to hire me to do a drawing for her, and it never worked out. But, you know, I'm hearing this now, that people's parents were praying for me. Yeah. And so it must have been, I think it was that. So now I'm returning the favor, and I'm praying for my brother because he's an atheist. So I'm like, oh no, you just wait.
That's amazing. Yeah, I love the power of prayer. I mean, I can think of some amazing stories. One in particular of this, there was this evangelical seminary that all of these evangelical pastors were becoming Catholic after they finished the seminary. Well, it turns out that seminary used to be a convent for nuns, like 50 years prior, before the evangelical church kind of bought it and took it over. And the charism of those nuns were to pray for pray for converts, pray for conversions to the Catholic faith. And so these nuns for hundreds of years had occupied the space and just prayed all day long, right? And of course, when that was taken over and these evangelical Christians were being trained there, they all were starting to become Catholic, and no one could figure out why, but here it was. This was the historical root of this, which I think is amazing. And the idea that anywhere those people are, we're praying for you all over the world. You don't even know necessarily each of those people, right? But as you learn more and more, you go, yeah, well, that makes sense, right? I think of my own. So my Polish grandparents came to Canada during the war, and they left they were of course very Catholic. They left the Catholic faith because there was a really intense evangelization project by Jehovah's Witnesses at that time, targeting immigrants from Europe in the war. And so here are these Polish speaking immigrants, Catholic immigrants, didn't know kind of anybody, right? And this community was kind of targeting them and drawing them out of the Catholic faith. And so I only ever knew my great grandparents as Jehovah's Witnesses, and then my grandma also, my grandpa on that side. And it wasn't until I was older and I found a rosary and little Bible in my mom's kind of bureau as a teenager. And I said, Mom, what's this? Whose is this? First of all, what is a rosary? I didn't know at the time what it even was. But whose is this? She goes, this was my grandma's. She was Catholic, and here's what happened. And I think back to the prayers of, first of all, that I pray for them, that they kind of turn from that, and their seeking of God got them to the place it needed to be, right? Despite leaving the Catholic faith and kind of being converted into this new religious movement kind of thing. But I think of the power of their prayers through time and space. I can pray for them in time and space and hope that is effective, and God uses those prayers, but they can pray for me too, right? And I think, how cool is it that here, because my wife and I are both Catholic converts to the faith. Here we are coming back into a faith that my great grandparents kind of were drawn out of, all those years later. I think it's a beautiful kind of symmetry in there in how prayer works, through time and space like that. I think it's pretty cool. Maybe there's a story in there. I don't know.
There is something in it because I think a few days ago, someone from my village, I lived in a village in Poland when I was little, like a real village. And someone from there messaged me, and she told me a little bit, just like one sentence about my great-grandparents. And she said that they were very, very faithful Catholics.
Yeah.
And my grandmother, my father's mother, even though he was an atheist, she prayed her rosary every night. So there's something in prayer. I don't know what it is, but I think righteous prayer, that's the key, because praying for the material things, that's not,
sure.
I don't think that, I don't think God connects with that. But a true righteous prayer for people's salvation, one's own salvation, to produce good fruit for the world, those prayers I find not only get answered quite quickly, but they have a lasting effect.
Yeah. I love that. You talk about how beauty kind of drew you back in this medieval, beautiful medieval kind of, you said it looks like at the Middle Ages, this church that you began going to, and how beautiful that was, and how that drew you in. There is this beauty in, the liturgy done well, in the Catholic Mass done well, in a beautiful building, that I said before, I think is really what's going to more and more capture, people and draw them more into the faith, as the rest of the world is kind of one big dopamine hit, right? Just like, here's the next video, scrolling on TikTok kind of thing, right? Is that real beauty that I think is going to begin to hopefully kind of draw people into something that's going to look more and more different than everything else that's out there, I think. Do you think there's, like, I guess, do you think that makes sense, that there's, especially, I guess, from an artistic, kind of, you have a film background, you're an illustrator, you're an author. It seems to me that this is what's a huge thing the church has as advantage, is beauty in a world that's kind of turned away from that. Does that make sense?
100% I agree. Yes, when you look at the artists that the church supported over the years, when you just look at the Vatican and the artworks there, not only is it beauty, but it's the kind of beauty that we discussed earlier. It's the kind of beauty with no gimmick. Yeah. There's nothing there but human skill and divine inspiration. There's no pyrotechnics, there's no light show, there's no auto-tune, there's no factory or AI printer that's going to polish the sculpture. It's just people that were devoted to not only understanding God, but creating things that are going to help other people understand God. And why wouldn't, God use beauty? I mean, beauty is everywhere in his creation. And like I said, it's not something that I can define even, but it seems to be, the more beautiful something is, the better it applies God's law and order. That's what I'm starting to find. The more beautiful something is, the less it has to scream. The more it has to scream for your attention, the less beautiful it is. And quite often it actually packages something quite mediocre and sometimes even ugly, in order to distract you from the fact that it's ugly and mediocre. So it needs a nice little wrap. You won't find that with I think, Catholic and Christian art, if it's done for if it's done by people who know what they're doing. Because I've seen a church or two where it's like, who built this and how dare you?
Absolutely. And and truth too, right? Like story, like you have written a true story. It resonates. Like there's power in that, right? Because it's speaking from a place of truth and goodness of God, right? And there's so much out there these days. Never mind the 30-second TikTok videos that people are scrolling through, right? Or Instagram reels that are just kind of scrolled through and kind of consumed like little snacks, right? Even the other kind of stories, even longer form stories and miniseries and TV shows and films, there's a lot out there that is just not true anymore, right? It kind of lacks that depth, that truth, that goodness. So when something comes along that has those things, I feel like too, that's going to seem so different for people who are used to consuming things that are, like you say, pyrotechnics and explosions, right? Or a really kind of raunchy love story or something, or just very violent. Like there's power in the truth and beauty and goodness in story, right? In a world that's kind of lost that, I think.
Oh, I completely agree. And people have become too desensitized to beauty even. So I hope that true beauty would still be able to captivate a lot of people. But I do worry a little bit that we've gotten to a point where a lot of people are, I know I was there. Yeah. I was there where I would see beautiful things and maybe I took them for granted because they were part of our culture, and I wasn't able to appreciate it. And I guess younger people are more vulnerable to that, which the dark side knows, and that's why everything is catered towards young people. But hopefully more Christian artists are going to stop selling out Stop selling your talent to the other side. Stay in your kingdom. Create from that. You're going to probably end up making less money. Hopefully not, but for the first of us will. You're going to lose opportunities. But what you're going to do is you're going to contribute to a network and a culture that's going to grow. And eventually there's going to be more of us. And we will no longer feel the pressure to compromise. And we will be able to build companies, our own publishing houses, our own agencies, things like that. And we will be able to do what they did in the Renaissance. Create sublime art. To take the time, if you need to not shill out art after art after art because you have to, because it's time on Instagram, good art takes time. And they understood that back then. So I think it really, the first step towards God is going to happen in the human heart. It is a sacrifice. That's the nature of this life. You have free will. You can have everything, but if you want the truth, you are going to have to sacrifice some things for that. And I recommend that we do make those sacrifices. We have to sacrifice in order to say no to the things that are not good. And if more of us do that, then we're gonna actually create more opportunities. And as culture changes, as we create more art, more depth in art, the younger generations are going to have more of a comparison, and they're going to lose their desensitization, right? So we're going to get to a point where young people are going to choose beauty over mindless entertainment, beauty over distraction, depth over distraction, So once we get there, then I think we're going to have a nice, hopefully golden age coming around. But it starts now. It starts with us today. Understanding that the fruit we create today is going to affect the culture tomorrow.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. That's fantastic. Because of course, first of all, stories like yours, like your journey, so important to share for others, to encourage them on that journey. I love that, and I love that you are kind of trailblazing in that respect. Thank you for being brave like that, and taking that path. And then, when you're especially creating media, for kids, that does have that lasting, beautiful effect. You're writing stories that kids will hopefully grow up hearing and reading and treasuring and internalizing. And then, like you say, as they encounter other things, they're going to hopefully be choosing those beautiful things instead of the other things, that are out there. I'm hearing more and more of friends of, or my wife's cousins who are a bit younger than we are, 10 years or so younger than we are, who are ditching their smartphones. They're going, we are the generation that was kind of raised on the smartphone, those guys, and they're getting to a point where they're getting into their early 20s and going, I don't want this anymore. I know what this is doing to me, what this has done to me. I want beauty. I don't want this thing anymore, right? But they were raised on those good stories. They were raised on identifying truth and beauty. When they come into their own, when they kind of begin to look around and go, what do I want for my life in my early 20s? They see, I don't want this thing, right? They've learned enough. They know enough of what truth and beauty really is to ditch those things that are holding them back, right? You can't get a hold of them because they don't text, they email once in a while, but it's, they're forging that path because they've been exposed to that kind of stuff, and they know what's right and wrong, what's healthy, not healthy, what's good and beautiful and true and what's not. So I love that, what you're doing now with this is kind of opening up the heart to kids, of families, right? Arming them with that truth and beauty and goodness to see and recognize that as they grow up. I think that's awesome. And I think you articulate that very well. And I love that is so encouraging for other artists, writers, those working in the creative arts as Christians, as Catholics, to do that. I love that. That's very encouraging.
Well, we've been, I don't want to say hiding, but we've been discouraged for the last, I would say, 2 decades. And I would say, honestly, the last 100 years. What happened in the last century? We went from creating the Sistine Chapel and the Pieta to not being able to find our reins in the 20th century. Because, we were Christian art, and not just Christian art, but I would say every religious art, but we're Christians, so I'll focus on Christian. Christians are very good at creating traditional art. They're excellent at it. But something happened where once the radio and TV emerged, we just kind of didn't know what to do with ourselves. And the truth is, it's still there. The ability to tell stories, the God-given talents are still there. But we need to be brave enough to I'm not saying proselytize our faith but to live it, and to live it in a way where the fruit shows, right? So to not compromise, if more of us do that, and I think more of us will be doing that, because like you mentioned your friends, I think people have seen the fruit. They've seen the fruit of life without the foundations of truth, beauty, and goodness, and God and Christ at the center. A lot of people are not impressed. So now is the time, I think, to create content, particularly for children, because the gulf right now the world is so polarized right now that there's a big chance a lot of kids are going to derail irreversibly because it's so polarized. And we have an opportunity to prevent that from happening. Because if we create content for children that is going to awaken that pursuit of God, then eventually it's going to turn to faith. It's going to turn to love. And even if this child as an adult comes across difficult times, difficult decisions, compromises, that child will have a much better chance of making the right decision. Sometimes the more difficult decision, but the right decision. The world is not going to help them make that decision. The world is going to tell them, go follow the money, go follow the fame, be a social media influencer without really knowing what your skills and talents are, right? We need to tell them the other thing. We need to tell them that there's a God-given purpose. They need to connect with that. And to connect with that, we do it through prayer. Pray, reflect, ask for guidance. It will be given to you. And walking that path for a lifetime is how I think we're going to equip children to navigate through a world that can go in one or two directions right now. Yeah, that's very well said. And you are helping us to do that. Tell us, about the little donkey and God's big plan. It's fantastic. I love it. We love it here at my house. All my kids love it. And there's a wide spectrum of ages here who are enjoying it. Tell us about the genesis of this, and then kind of maybe a bit about what's going on here, because it's fantastic. It's wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm so glad that all your children are enjoying it. If they ever draw pictures, I want to see pictures, that if they're ever inspired to draw a picture of the little donkey.
Be careful.
No. I welcome them. And also I hope that it started a lot of wonderful conversations in the house between you and your children about their purpose. But yes, about the little donkey. So it's about a little donkey who has big dreams, but God has even bigger plans for him. So he has to be patient. At first, he's not allowed to do much because he's tied to a fence. But through the encouragement of a little girl who firmly believes that God has a very special purpose for him, he prays, he prepares for his purpose without knowing what it is. And boy, did God prepare a purpose for him. I think the parents can figure out what it is. It's got something to do with Palm Sunday. But for the children, they're basically going to learn the events of Palm Sunday through the eyes of a little donkey. And they're going to learn how even a seemingly small contribution to our God can end up being part of something bigger than the little donkey or than any of us could have ever imagined. And I truly believe that.
Can I tell you that I cried at the ending of the book?
Yes, you can. Tell me.
It was great. And, it is such an important lesson. I think, the sign of a good book for kids also teaches adults a lesson too, right? I think that's a signal for a very good kind of timeless book. And it is such an important lesson that you don't know what your purpose is, that what plan God has for you. It's sometimes revealed in bits and pieces. Like, we recently moved after 20 years in one town, moved to a new town, quit our jobs. We sold our house, had nothing planned. Kind of just relied on God to show us the way, right? Like the little donkey. And everything kind of fell into place, and it was amazing and miraculous, and it's a great story to tell. And I think it really just shows God's goodness to those who kind of abandon themselves to, I don't know what the plan is, God, but I'll do it. But that's kind of the book hit home, for us in that sense, right? That, you don't know, little donkey, what God's planned for you. And then, well, look how amazing it is. You're the immortal donkey, like in the story now, right? So that is a timeless story for all of us. And I think one of the most important things to learn, that you don't need to have it all or shouldn't have it all figured out. You got to just rely on, I'm doing my thing. I'm going to do life, and God will help me reveal that purpose. I'm going to pray. I'm going to do these things and trust God, right? And then there it is. You're a donkey that's lived on in Scripture for thousands of years, right?
It's exactly that. It's I would also add humility. That was a lesson. Yeah. We're all learning humility all the time, but we hear it when we grow up. But it's a different thing to understand what humility does. And it puts you in a state of surrender. Yeah. The little donkey, at one point wanted to be a horse. And that wouldn't have turned out well. He's not a horse. He's not supposed to be a horse. The fact that he was a little donkey and he became the best donkey that he could, humbly, just wanting to be useful. God found the most perfect purpose for him. So if things go well with this book, there might be part 2, where the little donkey's going to witness, the events after the 3 very dark days. I hope it comes to that book, because children, I would love the opportunity to tell children that walking the purpose that God has prepared for you, it's not going to be easy. There will be times where you will feel like a failure and the landscape will look abysmal. But that faith, that prayer, God resurrects. He resurrects, and he already has things ahead. The way this whole thing is designed, it's cyclical. Things have to die in order to fertilize the earth, and new things grow, right? So that trust, that humility, it cultivates a faith that we feel blind, yet we know we're not be because there's another pair of eyes that can see for us. So I won't be able to discuss that with children in this book, but hopefully in the next book, because that's a very important lesson that I hope parents also kind of pass on to the children, that the little donkey's going to have a little bit of a hard time later, but it'll be okay.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, we'll wait with bated breath for another installment in this book, because it's fantastic. And thank you so much. And thank you for joining me today on this show. It's been awesome talking to you, kind of unpacking your story, digging into stuff. There's fantastic insights in here. So really appreciate your time. I'll put links to all these things, your book in the show notes for people to find and to grab their copy. Is there anyone else you want to point them towards to find and follow things that you're doing? Where should they go to find more, more of your stuff?
I will point them first to Ascension's website. They can get the little donkey at ascensionpress.com/little donkey. If I got that wrong, please just put it in the description.
I'll put the right link for you either way.
Thank you. And my website is izzypix.com, and that's where they can learn about me, about my illustration work. The Little Donkey is my author's debut, so hopefully it's the first of many to come. But I have a long history of illustrating, so they'll be able to see it all on my website.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for being here today, Izabela. I want to say God bless you, the work you're doing for the church, and thank you so much for being here. This has been great.
Thank you, Keith, and God bless you too, and your family.
Thanks.